The fact is that most of the biggest catastrophes that we've witnessed rarely come from information that is secret or hidden. It comes from information that is freely available and out there, but that we are willfully blind to because we can't handle, don't want to handle the conflict that it provokes.
Politicians for decades have embraced failed economic policies, unwilling to examine the fundamental operation of land markets and how land markets affect sustainable economic growth.
Why do governments keep repeating their mistakes? At its heart, the problem with politics is an ignorance that is induced into our politicians. Social scientists are not doing their job of revealing the systemic cheating that shames our societies. That's why governments keep going in circles, round and round and round, dragging us back into the booms that drive up house prices that many people can't afford, which then turn into the busts which destroys their jobs. Financial crises will continue as banks find new ways to make money by defrauding the public. The problem is not with banks being too big to fail, it's more a case of bankers being too powerful to jail. Politicians refuse to even discuss the root cause of the financial crisis that continues to cripple the global economy. There are no whistleblowers in their ranks to force governments to face reality. Turning a blind eye to problems is natural, according to Margaret Heffernan.
So how do organizations think? Well, for the most part, they don't. And that isn't because they don't want to. It's really because they can't. And they can't because the people inside of them are too afraid of conflict. In surveys of European and American executives, fully 85% of them acknowledged that they had issues or concerns at work that they were afraid to raise.
100 years ago, an English judge pronounced that willful blindness was not a defence to a crime. In America, two men at the top of the Enron Corporation denied knowledge of the frauds that cost thousands of Americans their life's savings.
I firmly believe I'm innocent of the charges against me.
Jeff, do you think you will ever be able to admit to yourself that you may have committed crimes then?
No.
Why not?
Because I didn't.
Judge Simeon Lake told the Enron jury, knowledge can be inferred if the defendant deliberately blinded himself to the existence of a fact. Britain's parliamentarians applied the test of willful blindness when they quizzed Rupert Murdoch and his son James.
The day started off with Rupert Murdoch saying this was the most humble day of his life, but he refused to accept responsibility for the hacking.
So if you were not lying then, somebody lied to you. Who was it? I don't know.
Murdoch was asked if he thought that criminality was endemic within his organization. Listen to his answer.
Endemic is a very wide-ranging word.
Murdoch repeatedly slammed on the table when he said that it was impossible for him to be aware of everything in his organization.
But the failures of governments cannot be explained by willful blindness. Banks are encouraged by politicians to cash in on an endless stream of income that they do not earn. In the United States, one whistleblower did try to ring the alarm bell.
I was working here in the stock exchange building in the financial district with Fannie Mae. We moved here in order to be at the center of the financial market in Philadelphia. And Fannie Mae became much more aggressive in raising capital to expand its mortgage lending activities. We were issuing far more mortgage-backed securities than previously. And at the time, as a market analyst, I was beginning to become concerned seeing property prices really skyrocketing and escalating, increasing in some of our markets by double digits every year. Well, what I decided to try to do is at least alert our senior management to this situation. I was invited to meet with the president of Fannie Mae at the time, Larry Small. I expressed my concerns about what was happening in the market, in the property market, that I thought that it was a real concern that we were increasing our loan limits and accommodating the speculative fuel that was driving the markets. Larry appreciated that perspective, but in response basically said, Ed, there's not much we can do about it. We are only, at the time, 20% of the market. We're being driven by the market's not being driven by us. So if we don't increase our loan limits, we'll basically be giving up market share.
A reformed property tax could have prevented the financial crisis of 2008, but politicians were too busy with their pet policies.
The Democrats here in the Capitol Hill want to increase the tax on the rich. The Republicans say no, they want to cut spending on the relatively low-income people.
Mason Gaffney is one economist who did try to warn America of the need to treat the rent of land as the public's revenue.
There was no tax on payrolls to speak of up until 1941, when, ironically, by the way, it was introduced by Milton Friedman, a young bureaucrat at that time. Rent was the main support of governments at both the state and local levels, and the federal government did not play a big role. So federal taxes were small compared with state and local taxes, and most of those came out of rent.
The question is, which are the least bad taxes? And in my opinion, and this may come as a shock to some of you, the least bad tax is the property tax on the unimproved value of land, the Henry George argument from many, many years ago. It's an interesting thing if you're talking about taxes, about why it is that the property tax is so unpopular. It's not unpopular for good economic reasons. It's unpopular, in my opinion, for one simple reason. It's the only tax left on the books for which people have to write a big check. The income tax is a far worse tax. But, and I have to admit that I have some part of the guilt in this process, because during World War II I worked at the Treasury and helped to design the withholding system. My wife has never forgiven me for it. But with respect to the income tax, we've arranged it so it's taken off bit by bit and it's almost painless. With respect to the sales tax, we pay a little bit of it each time. With respect to the corporate tax and excise taxes, they're hidden in the price of things we buy. We don't even know we're paying them. But with respect to the property tax, that remains a tax that we as individuals have to pay and that we have to write a big check for. That's the fundamental reason, in my opinion, why it's so unpopular. But if you wanted to reduce the unpopularity of the property tax, the way to do it would simply be to provide for an effective method whereby it could be withheld at source in small payments, and that would eliminate a large part of the objection to it.
If governments included the land market in their analysis, they would be able to smooth out the business cycle. They could prevent the property booms that always turn into busts. But that is exactly why the knowledge is dangerous and why universities fail to teach their students the ethical economics of good governance.
Universities have been endowed by major rent collectors and land speculators and beneficiaries of government largesse. Stanford University, for example, was financed by Leland Stanford, whose fortune came from enormous land grants given to the Southern Pacific Railway. Cornell was financed by Ezra Cornell, who made his fortune during the Civil War, stringing wires behind General Grant. The University of Chicago was funded by John D. Rockefeller, the oil baron and monopolist. And so it goes from university to university. Now we have think tanks sponsored by, funded by wealthy rent collectors. And they're even worse than the universities have become. Well, take the Heritage Foundation, take the Cato Institute. They get their money from wealthy land barons and rent collectors, and they hire people to rationalize the viewpoint of those donors. So we need to develop economists who are strong enough individually to be independent of those donors.
Rents are the value we are willing to pay to use the services provided by nature and by society. Politicians treat this knowledge as forbidden to protect what Joseph Stiglitz, a Nobel laureate, calls rent-seeking. Policies exist for correcting the fatal weakness in the global economy. But politicians won't implement them. What will it take to mobilize all of us into insisting on change?